Yeah, and we're live another week with the SEO Leadership podcast. Today we have LeRoy on, SEO freelancer, consultant, and owner of SEOjobs.com. How are we, Nick?
Hello, how are you guys doing? I'm doing fantastic.
Great, great. Very busy this week. Very busy week. What about yourself?
Yeah, pretty much. Normally Q4 slows down just a little bit as everybody's trying to get off work a little bit early. But I feel like at least with most of my clients and initiatives, people are just kind of pedal to the metal all the way to the end. So we'll see how this goes. A couple more weeks till we get into the new year.
Definitely. We've actually picked up quite a bit over the past few weeks, and with a lot of clients looking to sort of hire and hit the ground running in sort of 2023 or 2024, sorry. What's your thoughts on that? Is it always good to sort of build ahead of time?
Yeah, I really like that. And it's funny that you should say that for your business, similar to SEO jobs. I kind of wrote off December as nobody's going to try to hire. It's hard to interview. We certainly aren't going to onboard you before the holidays. And I've actually been having just as much business as I would on any other month. So I think a lot of people are thinking about 2024 strategies, budgets, and they're trying to get ahead of it, which I think is going to be a big advantage when it comes to trying to kind of shoot out of the cannon full force come 2024 versus, we roll into the office or turn on the computer and be like, okay, 24, what do we do?
Exactly. And I was doing a bit of research before. How long has SEO Jobs been around for? How long have you been owning that project?
So I have owned it for about a year and a half, but it's been up for 2 years when my previous partner had it by himself.
Yeah, because I was doing a bit of research this obviously before you came on, and I think the searches globally for SEO jobs has rose over like 311% since 2016. Was that something that you were sort of conscious about whenever you were going into SEOjobs.com?
So it was. So I think a lot of us, we spend quite a bit of time on LinkedIn. And unfortunately, it's like you wake up every morning or maybe before you go to bed and you're scrolling through. And how often are you guys not seeing somebody say, unfortunately, I was made redundant or it didn't work out or yada, yada, yada. And so when I had the opportunity to join Peter at the time for SEO jobs and then eventually make the decision to buy him out, it was with this idea of like people like that story or those conversations were not becoming less. And it's only become more and more. So, I just really like having the opportunity of being able to support our industry as a whole. They've given so much to me, in my career, and it's just an opportunity. SEO jobs is never going to be as big as like a LinkedIn or an Indeed, but the goal is that the quality will be significantly higher. And if I can help, just a handful of people find jobs during, especially this stressful time,
Yeah.
in general, it's like that makes it worth it in itself.
And sorry, sure, I know you have something lined up, but from your side of things, Nick, how are you getting like a reason behind that? Are you seeing any sort of point of why people are being made redundant at the minute?
So I don't have anything obviously like concrete, but I think what we're really seeing as a whole is we had a lot of companies that I'm kind of calling COVID rich, meaning,
Yeah.
we had the companies that obviously struggled during COVID and we all know about those. It's all over the news. But then we had a lot of like internet-based companies, your SaaS products, even like look at Shopify and their growth was like a hockey stick during COVID. And a
Yeah.
lot of them, what they did is they planned to be able to maintain and grow off of that in 2023 and 24. And I think what happened is a lot of those companies weren't able to hit those goals. So they staffed up, they invested at a level that they weren't able to hit their returns. And I would say one thing that kind of compounded that is, at the beginning of COVID and even maybe right before, I would say SEOs were getting an absolute premium in salary
Mhm.
because it was so difficult to be able to hire good quality individuals. So I think it was just kind of a perfect recipe for, people need to start saving money and trimming salary. And, a lot of SEOs, I don't think it's the best decision, but you can understand strictly from a business perspective and a financial aspect why it's happening.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I spoke to SEO candidates on maybe $250,000, $300,000 who've been made redundant, and going from that sort of salary package, you obviously can see why they want to maintain that, but the amount of roles hitting those figures at the minute is getting sort of increasingly smaller, which makes sort of their lives tougher and everybody's lives tougher.
Yeah, I'd be curious if you guys agree with this. The people that I talk to, it's like if you need a job, at least like in the US, like an agency job between $50,000 and $70,000 isn't difficult to have. It's finding
Mhm.
those rare in-house jobs and
Yeah.
those that are maybe making over $150,000. Those are where it seems that applying with your app via an application, ZipRecruiter, any of those, like that's not going to get you in the door. You need an SEO for hire that has connections, or you have to be able to use your own network. It's just not a, click a button, submit your application, and start 3 weeks later anymore.
Big time, big time. And I think it comes from that point with the higher salaries. I think those guys at the top who have now had to sort of drop down in salary, or obviously they have the great experience, they have, perfect experience, maybe like 10 years in SaaS and stuff. So they do have excellent experience, but because they're coming from not such a high salary, they're pushing everybody else down as well. Because they're taking lower. So companies were like, we're paying this guy maybe 150. So there's no way you can get close to that if you've got maybe like 5 years less experience.
Totally. No, I agree with you 100%. Like, as I mentioned before, we're seeing a little bit of the inverse of the hot streak that we saw a couple of years ago. I had always kind of joked, but I do genuinely believe this. Like, it sounds bad, but I kind of can categorize employees, and you guys might not do this outwardly, but I'm sure you do internally. It's like there is definitely a concept of like an A employee and like a C plus employee, and we
Yeah.
need all of them to be able to make businesses work. But what happened many years ago is we had C plus employees make A, type employee dollars. And like you said, as the A employees, as you will, started needing new gigs, it just like you said, it pushes everything down.
Big time, big time.
To quickly transition into the topic of A players, when we recently had you on the webinar earlier on in the year, we were chatting around the time when AI was just sort of becoming the talk of the town. How do you think it's affecting job employments right now and job opportunities? And in addition to that, how important are A players then in this new season that we're in?
I love this question. And the reason is because I think a lot of people are really scared, for their jobs right now. And how's the best way to say this? I think the gap between quality SEO is at the largest. And I think AI is really a risk to people that maybe are on the lower end of it. And what I mean by this is, think about the work that you might farm out to like Fiverr.com, or you might consider overseas, where you don't really have to know SEO so well. You have to be able to kind of plug and play within a good system, that has been built. I think those roles, those gigs, those opportunities are at risk because people are able to use a ChatGPT to be able to build out, processes that are automated. Now, one of the extreme situations that I take, and some agree, some don't, is I'm not concerned for those that have more SEO experience and are more experienced just in general. And a lot of it comes down to artificial intelligence isn't a critical thinker yet. It doesn't have the business acumen to say, when we create this SEO strategy, implement it, here's what we believe is the financial impact to a company. And as long as you are able to have kind of that business acumen, and what I keep talking about in these type of webinars is effective communication. These are things that AI cannot, and I preface it with yet, they cannot do. So I view, again, kind of recapping, as like, if you are doing some pretty entry level stuff and you're not pushing yourself to grow, you're kind of doing checkbox SEO, I would be a little bit nervous that AI could replace some of your work, and that's going to have an impact on that level of SEO jobs, similar to what we've seen with like basic 500 word article count. It's like people aren't even paying the $10 anymore. They're going straight to AI and say, just write it for me. However, if you can make meaningful contributions, build strategy, think, appropriately and effectively communicate, I don't think AI today is going to be a huge risk to your job.
Yeah, I totally agree. And talking about it from your point of view as an SEO consultant, how do you sell yourself to companies. Obviously, you have a great reputation within the industry, which probably helps as well. But you mentioned there the people in the sort of the 70 to 80,000 salary bracket. We talk to a lot of clients who are maybe looking at an SEO specialist in that sort of region, and we find it quite difficult because they see, they put up a job post on LinkedIn and maybe get 100 applicants who I guarantee 95% of them have no sort of SEO ability at all. It's just random people applying from all over. But how do you sort of convince them to, we can find like 70,000 to 80,000, it's quite a large bracket. There's going to be people who have maybe been on that salary for the last 8 years or so, or there's maybe somebody with 4 or 5 years experience who's really killing it and who earns that bracket. How do you sort of convince themselves to go with that person?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a broader conversation, and I think the asterisk to all this is, what are the company's needs? And because the reality, and it kind of goes against SEOjobs.com and SEO for hire, is sometimes you do need a contractor or you need an agency because it truly is a better fit for what your business is looking for. However, I would say now is the time to be able to scoop up some really smart people at a reasonable rate. You may not be investing in SEO yet. And if you need to hire, if you bring somebody in at 40 grand, again, we'll just use like the US market, 40 to 50 grand for an entry level position. What people don't always think about is it's going to take somebody who's making $150,000 to coach these people. They're going to have to answer all the questions. They're going to have to look over their work. And that's the only way that a junior level resource is going to succeed at that price point and at that level. And that's not necessarily their fault. That's the reality of when all of us are starting new in our career. Alternatively, as you had said, I would say there's kind of this like unicorn SEO, which is your 2 to 3 years. You know enough about SEO to kind of know where not to waste your time, but you aren't so deep into it where you can't have your mind changed or you're just indignant about your strategies, right? And these are the unicorn SEOs that were making 6 figures a couple of years ago because they weren't available and people were overpaying. And now as they're becoming more and more available, I think this is the right area to invest in. Because again, moving from 40 to 50 to say 70 to 80 allows somebody to have a little bit more of the basics down. They're starting to really build upon the critical thinking. And I think these are the type of people that can truly help the needle move versus just trying to learn as much as they can and then implement, as they continue to learn. Does that answer your question, Darius?
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Perfect. And I know we've seen quite a lot of companies hiring at the minute, as we spoke about. The likes of Brain Labs, I know you sort of know them well. We had Travis Talent on our podcast a week or two ago. But companies like that always seem to be hiring, always seem to be doing well. Do you see any sort of reason why those guys are doing something? Are they doing anything different that they're attracting these kind of top SEOs, or are you seeing anything there?
Yeah, so I can't speak for Brand Labs as like a company. It's just kind of like what you had said, from what I've seen of Travis and heard, it seems like the company is doing really well and they're hiring left and right, which is great. What I will say, and this is where I'll kind of just allude to what Brand Labs is doing right, is I think there's, again, similar to SEO talent, I think the gap between a quality digital marketing, service provider and a quality, and let's just call it a crap one. I think a couple of years ago, everybody was afraid of not getting on kind of the SEO or digital marketing bandwagon. It was kind of like the later we wait to be able to jump on this, the more it's going to cost us. So it seemed like anybody could spin up, an SEO agency. They could hire cheap people, and again, you build this SOP, these processes that you just need somebody, butt in seats to be able to execute. And I think as Google has become so much more sophisticated, we have AI, content is not, the same as it used to be. There is just a big difference between the quality that these agencies can deliver. And I'm sure you have talked to quite a bit, but some agencies are doing really, really poorly. I mean, 2023 has killed a lot of agencies. And I think it's people that are very smart from a business perspective and recognize the opportunity, but didn't necessarily have the expertise or the budgets to be able to staff it appropriately. Whereas I think the other side, and I'm just going to go ahead and say and hope that, Brand Labs is in that side, is there's a lot of industry veterans. They work there. They're smart. They've invested in it. They're consistently upskilling their teams. And I believe that is realistically translating into good work, which is making them retain their clients and grow. And if I recall, Travis's last post, I mean, he had like 8 open positions. And,
yeah.
it's a great spot to be in. I just think that there are few companies that are quote unquote doing it right, which are putting them in that situation. And I think someone like Brand Labs, they're going to get some really good quality, talent now because of just where the market is.
Definitely. And I know you mentioned there about sort of agencies struggling this year. From my side of things, just looking and talking to candidates and seeing their CVs, I'm seeing a lot more sort of acquisitions recently. Every sort of CV that I see, especially in the US, there seems to be working for a company and then it's got bought over by either like a larger agency or a more sort of invested agency. Are you seeing that from your side of things, or what's your opinions on that?
Yeah, it makes sense. I don't think I'm quite as deep in the weeds to know all the whys. I think what I'm hearing more is a lot more on the in-house side or agencies where it's like it's an all-out failure, or people are having that COVID rich story and they're pulling back. So I 100% believe what you're saying, but like I said, I'm just not quite as deep in the weeds as you are.
Yeah. Sorry, go on, Joe.
You recently got on a webinar with Search Tides and spoke about any skill sets that SEOs should work on or possess, especially going into the new year. Could you maybe name or list 3 skill sets that SEOs can sort of work on, especially when looking to job hunts within the new year?
Yeah, you bet. I'm glad that you brought this up. I feel like this is where I'm probably most passionate, just when I talk to individuals. Kind of building off of the conversation we had before, there is a big gap between entering, the SEO space and, being, somebody who's been 10, 15, 20 years in it. And also where AI is going to have an impact. And there are 2 things that I think really help SEO stand out from one another. And I would love if you guys challenge me or tell me you disagree, but I think we'll all be on the same side. One, we all know being data driven is great, but I think that we don't have enough people who are thinking about SEO in the sense of dollars and cents.
Yeah.
When I charge my clients $1,000 a month, for instance, if I'm not making them $3,000 in back minimum, why in the world would they pay for me? And I think a lot of times SEOs as a whole, we get stuck in SEO takes 6 months and your sessions are through the roof. With GSC, it's your impressions. It's like there's just so many soft metrics. But I just made a comment. I don't remember if it was on LinkedIn or if I said it on Search Tides, but I have yet to have a client that accepts payment in sessions or impressions or ranking. It's like they're paying their bills and their employees with revenue. So I think that if we're not, as a whole, this industry, we need to just continue to be better and recognize that there is a dollar equivalent. Some of us have it easy in the sense that it's an e-commerce site, so we can literally say it was this exact dollar. But too many people will sit there and say, oh, it's lead gen or this is B2B. And they use it as an excuse to not necessarily put a dollar value to it. And I think that the moment that we lose track of what is the tangible dollar that we're making our clients or our employers is a key moment where we're at risk, whether it be for our job or just investment in the SEO channel as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We had Eli Schwartz on our podcast not so long ago as well, and he said the exact same thing. He said SEOs at the minute, especially if you're younger, need to start learning more about how to talk to C-suite in terms of revenue and ROI and how that can affect, or how SEO can affect that, because that's the way forward at the minute.
Absolutely, and you just nailed my second point, and I'm not surprised because Eli and I are good buddies. We think 99% alike. But the other part is just effective communication. So it's not only being able to think critically and be able to put your numbers on a spreadsheet and be able to kind of build a nice story, but you have to be able to effectively communicate. And this kind of goes back to what I did just talk about on Search Tides is, I made a comment of saying, like, we have to undorkify SEO because we cannot walk into the C-suite or people that are making decisions with their revenue and talk about canonical tags and server logs and redirects, because they've never heard of these things, or if they do, they certainly don't care about it. And we have all been in a situation where like their eyes are rolling in the back of their head.
Yeah.
And once you see that, you've lost them. So what we can all do is work on building these narratives, become more effective communicators. And I guarantee you, if you can become an effective communicator, there's no better skill that will put you in, say, the top 5% of all SEOs, because that is probably the biggest issue we have as an industry.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
And just building off of that, you can answer this from, I guess, a personal experience or from an overall perspective. How do you handle imposter syndrome, and I guess, especially with AI coming into the picture now, how can SEOs move forward with it? Have you ever experienced imposter syndrome yourself? And yeah, especially if you are going into, say, boardrooms with C-suites in them. How do you manage tackling that imposter syndrome? Yeah.
So it sounds a bit silly, but I've actually tried to embrace like imposter syndrome a bit in the last couple of years, because I've been doing this for almost 15 years and I still have it. And I think a lot of us kind of are thinking, when do I finally become so confident that I'm not going to second guess myself? And the reality is, at least in my experience, is like, it doesn't go away. So the way that I try to look at it is, if I'm not, making myself think twice, double checking my data, really thinking about what I'm saying, like at that point, then I'm almost kind of losing trust. Because in our world, there isn't a whole lot that's guaranteed in SEO outside of Google's going to continue to make it harder and harder to get your share. So instead of saying, here are the 3 things you should do to, compete, or sorry, not compete, but, fix your imposter syndrome, I think really just lean into it. Especially as I went freelance, I no longer have a boss that sits there and says, I realize you kind of suck at these 3 things. Go be better at it by the time we talk next year. So I try to lean into things. I'm not a huge one for public speaking, and you probably won't ever see me on the stage, but I do these like webinars. I did a podcast for a little bit, because I realize if I go out and about and I have to communicate, that is doubling down on that effective communication. You need to be able to communicate appropriately. And so I guess kind of going back to what you're saying, it's like, so with imposter syndrome, it's really just like push yourself out in what is uncomfortable, and don't be afraid to like think twice, question yourselves, and get other people's opinions. Because I think the more, open we are to feedback, the better that we can become.
Awesome. And just building off one of the previous questions that we had, we actually asked this early on in the year, and I sort of wanted to build off of it and see if we've had a developed answer as well. Do you have any tips on effective onboarding for team leads?
Yeah, so it's interesting because as I mentioned before, I'm freelance now, so it's been a while since I've had an official team. But for me, when I had teams, the biggest tip that I can give you is just try to build as much trust as you can and have an open line of communication. Because what I can tell you will screw things up the most is if the people that are working underneath you are afraid to ask you questions. Because at worst, they're not going to do something and the expectation isn't going to be made. Or, at best, they're going to give it their best go, and they might send something out to a client or, execute something that's less than ideal. So I think always being receptive to being able to give feedback as close to like, just, as it's available, it's like, just be available. I think that truly is the best thing that you can do. And the other thing that I'll do too, it's kind of the opposite. One is just being available and flexible, but also establish your expectations extremely quickly and be very clear, because there's nothing worse than a football goalpost that wavers, as you're trying to kick the field goal. So if you can on day one, or as close as you can, tell these individuals, if it's, he or she is sitting down and say, here is your role you've been hired for. This is our expectation. And then as you continue to talk and you do one-on-ones and follow-up reviews, it's like never move those goalposts. Always reflect upon how they're working and how that is impacting the expectations of this role.
Perfect. And Nick, I know we chatted about what skills people should have coming in 2024, and obviously the effects of AI. But in terms of SGE, are you prepping your clients in any particular way? Do you have any advice for people on their strategies going into 2024?
Oh, and I look perplexed because I think this is how we all feel about SGE. It kind of goes back into that imposter syndrome, right? So my personal thought about SGE is I don't think what we will see in mainstream Google will be anything like what we are currently seeing for us that are opted into it. And I only say that partially because it's wishful thinking on my end, because I don't want to have to deal with what the reckoning will be. But also we know that it takes a long time for it to load currently. And we know that it's a very expensive resource for Google. So it's very unlikely that they're going to roll it out in its current form. So I'm optimistic that we might see kind of what is the is state, which is going to be very debilitating and cause a lot of heartache. And then hopefully by the time it gets released, it'll be something that's a little bit closer to like the featured snippet that we see, instead of kind of stacking on two very similar results, one being like an SGE answer and one being a featured result. Hopefully it'll bridge between the two, and then it's talking more about, with your clients about how are we making sure that we're formatting our content, citing things appropriately, in a way that will just make us more effective in getting either the featured snippet or the SGE answer. I will say the one thing with SGE is like, better or worse, it's going to very likely impact us all very similarly. So if I'm taking a 30% haircut for my clients, like so are my competition, very likely. So I think that's a different conversation versus, back in the day, your penguins and pandas, where it's like we literally were just seeing like 20, 30, 80% drops overnight.
Yeah. Brilliant.
I just wanted to wrap it off with a question, just reeling it back to what we were chatting about at the beginning of this this webinar, was the period that everyone is in right now, on offboarding and looking for new talent. When would you advise for your clients is like the best time to make the decision to hire?
Oh, I mean, I guess for them, it's 6 months before they know they even need it. But I think and it's really different depending, I hate to use it depends because it's so cliche in our world, but I think for someone like an agency where that there's always going to be opportunity, you're just trying to balance, your budgets, with talent. I think for them, it's really trying to identify who is available with what right type of skill sets, and maybe making, a stash, fund where you might be able to make that extra hire maybe a little bit earlier because the right person is available. And I would just say, I think the exact opposite for in-house is when you can get to the situation where it's like, SEO is a very clear, like profitable channel for you, trying to then understand what are the benefits of paying for your agency or your freelance client and being able to take your resources in-house. And then, you talk about, just kind of getting them started. What's the cost of ramping up and all that kind of stuff. So I know not a super clear answer to that question, because what I really want to say is all the time, be on the lookout.
I think it comes down a lot to structure as well, Nick. Some agencies I see have somebody who's top level, who strong and technical, on page, everything, but once they leave, they're stuck with a huge gap because he was maybe doing the job of 2 or 3 SEOs, and now their whole team's sort of out of position. We have a client that's probably one of the most organized clients we have. They're actually on retainer now, and they're already want 4 to 6 new hires over the next year, and going into 2024. I think companies with a clear sort of progression roadmap and sort of set team structure where you can work your way up to, like, if you want to go more technical side, you can work your way up to a technical SEO specialist and then on to like head of SEO and stuff like that. I think that's going to be key going into next year as well, having that sort of set structure and sticking to it.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me.
Yeah,
Perfect. Well, I think that just about wraps us up. Nick, that's probably the quickest webinar I think I've ever been on anyway. I think that flew in. Thanks so much for your time. Well, obviously, we'll drop all your socials. Is there anybody you want to give a shout out to or anything like that before we?
Yeah, you know what? I think you mentioned Eli Schwartz. You know, it sounds like he already did my job, you know, giving some answers already. So shout out to Eli. Hope life is good. But happy holidays to everybody, and looking forward to what SEO brings us in 2024 and beyond.
Perfect. Thanks so much for coming on, Nick. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
See you later.